Morning, everyone. Nice to see you all. We are going to ease into things this morning as people continue to filter in. I want to welcome everyone back. We see some familiar faces from our first session, which is great, and we see some new faces as well, so welcome to our new friends who are learning about STEM Squared and joining STEM Squared. So these are more serious questions now to get a little feel of who's in the room. Your role in education: student, teacher, principal, admin, other. $39, we closed it. So we have, just keep that on that slide for a second, 50, about half the room teachers, administrators, and then about a quarter of the room folks from different facilities and different organizations. Good. That gives you a flavor of who's in the room today. And then did you come to the first session of STEM Squared last month? How many of you were at our session here in October? Yes or no? All right, so about half. Great. That's great. Excellent. All right. Off we go. Francis, you're up.
Okay. So if you were in the half of the folks that were here last time, you'll remember this diagram, the STEM pipeline. And we went over this in more detail, but really the message here is that when you take a look, when you compare the number of students graduating high school to the number of students completing STEM degrees, and this is a national look, only 6% are taking on STEM degrees and completing them. The other statistic often quoted is that half of the folks who start STEM degrees don't finish them. So that's another important piece that from last time to kind of keep in the back of your mind as the folks who are really laying the foundation early. And again, from last time, just to sort of catch you up to speed, the number of students who are college and career ready for math and science, when we're looking at students, that's 6% who end up completing STEM degrees, and only 50% of them, it's 50% of those who started. Entering college, only 30% of our students are actually ready to take on college level science, and 45% in math. So again, putting things into perspective. We talked about Bloom's taxonomy and the idea that STEM is higher order thinking. We looked at this diagram and sort of, it's a bit rearranged. Bloom's taxonomy, typically you see 6 levels: remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, creating is the typical 6 levels, increasing in level of higher order thinking as you go up. But this pyramid's been sort of rearranged to indicate, in the case of STEM, creating, evaluating, and analyzing is something that goes on sort of in tandem or in parallel. And when you think about the amount of time on learning that we're allocating, the traditional pyramid is very wide at the bottom, narrow at top. Well, it actually needs to be the other way around. And we're going to take a look at how that comes into play with scientific and engineering practices as we go on. We also promised you a little bit of Kane's Arcade 2, and here, I'll give you this.
Thank you. So how many remember Kane from the last session? Okay, so if you weren't here from the last session, we met this boy named Kane. And Kane's dad has a body shop in East LA. And Kane loves STEM, loves it, right? And he built an arcade. What did he make the arcade out of? Cardboard boxes, right? And a lot of tape, right? I think my favorite scene from that original one was when he's passing the tickets out, right? He crawls into the machine and he's passing the tickets out of the machine. So there's a second chapter to Kane's story. That has exploded, right? Kane's Arcade has really exploded. They did that social media event and everybody arrived at Kane's Arcade. Well, here's part 2.
This all started with going to buy a door handle. It was last summer, and I went down to this random used auto parts store, and I met this 9-year-old boy named Kane.
I'm Kane.
Who had taken over his dad's store with this elaborate cardboard arcade. I was his first customer.
He saw something in my son that nobody else saw, and he made a film about it.
I posted the film online 4 months ago. Little did I realize that both of our lives were about to change.
Finally, tonight, we have a great story out of Los Angeles, East LA to be precise.
When you're a lonely 9-year-old boy, an empty cardboard box can be a universe of possibility.
I found this great story. I want to share it with you.
They're lining up to play at his cardboard arcade.
This kid made his own arcade.
A filmmaker discovered Kane's Arcade, and now it's a movie.
When I first posted the film, I had a goal of trying to raise $25,000 for Kane's scholarship fund.
I figured, oh, well, he's dreaming.
That night, my phone just started ringing off the hook. Donations were coming in.
Here's a live look at Kane's Arcade where you can see there's a long line of people.
The next day, it was over 100,000. I was like, what is going on?
A 9-year-old boy now has a huge college fund.
He's the talk of the town. Is he a future billionaire?
What's next for this precocious 9-year-old?
The video came out on Monday.
Nearly 2 million people have watched it.
By Saturday, we have 4-hour lines waiting to play Kane's Arcade.
When a little boy's dream came to life.
We finally got some customers here.
I told my dad that was the best day of my life.
Celebrities were tweeting. Kane's Arcade was trending on Twitter worldwide. It hit the front page of Reddit, and people started coming from around the world to visit Kane's Arcade.
UK, London, Spain, everywhere.
They've been flying in, taking taxis from the airport directly to Kane's Arcade.
Jack Black even came by with his kids to play. But for me, the most inspiring thing was the wave of cardboard creativity inspired in kids around the world.
Hi, Kane. This is me, Jojo Roman from Facebook. I fanned you, and this is my bubblegum machine.
My game is called Basketball Groove, and if you get all 4 balls in, you get a pencil.
Cool prize, Abby.
It's called Tilt-A-Ball. It's made with popsicle sticks. Thanks, Isaac, for the game.
You're welcome.
Oh, my name's Ezra, and I made this pinball machine. And I got the idea by watching a little video off my dad's computer. I also made a coin slot.
I get 10 tries.
I made a same game as like this, but everything different. Come on, Bo.
Who wants to go in the car wash too?
Nice.
Awesome.
And I love your arcade. Man, I don't know what to say. You're just famous.
Kane has grown a lot. I mean, first of all, he's literally grown a lot. He's probably outgrown 2 staff shirts, and we had to make him a boss shirt.
I'm the boss. That's a lot of work.
Kane has really come out of his shell. He talks to everybody freely now, and he doesn't stutter anymore, and he's doing way better in school.
One of the things I've learned from this experience is how a small gesture can change the life of a child. And to think that there's so many other kids like Kane out there who just need somebody to come in and buy a fun pass. So we started the Imagination Foundation. So the Imagination Foundation's mission is to find, foster, and fund creativity and entrepreneurship in kids like Kane.
I see a lot of promise in the Imagination Foundation as a way of advocacy for kids' interests.
One of the greatest challenges I think we face in education is tapping into children's natural powers of creativity. And one of the appeals of Kane's Arcade is it's demonstrating how deep those powers are and how readily people will rise to the challenge if you give it to them.
It's not enough anymore just to learn the basic kinds of language arts and math skills. Our children need to be innovators and inventors.
And I think if we can make that systemic in our education systems, we'll transform the world for our children and for ourselves.
After we started the foundation, the first thing we did is we hit the ground running with a school pilot program. Within the first 2 months, over 100 schools in 9 countries participated using project-based learning to teach kids math, science, and engineering.
I told Kane that when I was a kid, I also built cardboard rockets. These were space capsules that we could actually fly in our backyard. And here I am, many years later, and I'm still building spacecraft, but this one, a real one that landed on Mars.
So the idea is not only to give kids the tools to build the things that they can imagine, but to also imagine the world that they can build. Are these the flames shooting out of the back of the ship?
Yeah, I think we're gonna put a big fan.
Childhood imagination will take you from cardboard to this in just a few years.
Ready for liftoff?
Pretty cool.
So Kane, here's the idea. On October 6th, the 1-year anniversary of that flash mob we did for you, to make your day this year, we do a global cardboard challenge, inviting the whole world to play. This October 6th, the 1-year anniversary of the flash mob we did to make Kane's Day, the Imagination Foundation is launching a global cardboard challenge. Here's how to play. Go to cardboardchallenge.com and sign up to host an event or find an event near you. If you want, you can set a fundraising goal to support the Imagination Foundation. Then invite everyone you know to come out and play.
It doesn't matter how old you are. All you need is cardboard and your imagination.
You can build an arcade, a robot, a rocket ship, anything you can imagine. There's events already being planned in kitchens in Idaho, school districts across Texas. There's a cardboard amazement park being planned in Kampala. The idea is just to bring the whole world together to play and celebrate creativity and imagination. For me, this all started with a door handle, and I ended up buying a fun pass. And for Kane, it started with this small basketball hoop that he won as a prize and built this whole arcade around. This October 6th, we're inviting the world to come together for a global day of play and just imagine what we can build.
Remember the Fun Pass? It was $1 to play one game or $2 to play 500 games, right? So it was a good deal to get the Fun Pass, which is what the filmmaker received there. I think what this video does for me, it proves for me that in my head that higher order thinking and that whole notion of higher order thinking and curiosity and creativity, it's there. Those seeds are in our kids, right? And they just need to be watered and tended to in a certain way. And you won't just get a flower, you'll get a mighty oak as a result. It's in there. It's absolutely in there. And it's up to us. It's incumbent upon us as educators to draw those out, right? And we know that a lot of the standardized movement that we have in our educational system right now, and Ken Robinson sometimes talks about this, how we maybe educated the creativity out of our kids. It's incumbent upon us, right? If we want to, we don't just want to prepare students to live in the world. We want to bring them to a level where they're ready to change it. And in order to bring students to a level where they're ready to change the world, we have to tap into their higher order thinking. And that's what Kane does, and that's the message I get from Kane.
And you know, just before we go on to do this question, I noticed Representative Jerry Paracella is here. If he had planned to say a word, I don't know if that's something that you still have time for or not. And also, I think Elizabeth Wester is here as well from Congressman Tierney's office.
Morning, I'm Jerry Paracella. I'm the state representative for Beverly in the neighboring town. And how are you doing? I have a fourth grader, so this is an area of interest to me as well. It's kind of interesting, you know, unfortunately it's the 50th anniversary of the death of JFK, but we all remember his words when he wanted to have a man go to the moon and what that meant to our educational system and getting science and technology and engineering, really a focus of that and what it meant. And with the competition we have from China and other countries, it's really important that we have a focus on STEM. And our state treasurer, his wife is an arts teacher, so he likes to say STEAM and add the arts as well. But I just want to thank you all for your interest and focus in this area, and welcome you to the North Shore, and thank you very much for your efforts. And we're trying to do all we can at the state level to provide funds and resources. As you know, it's been a tough economic time, but the state is making an economic recovery. In the last couple of years in the legislature, we've tried to increase local aid to school districts to help fund these innovative programs. So I just want to welcome you and thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I know Brian doesn't want to speak, but I do see Brian Lapierre up there from the AFT as well. Thank you for coming by.
So I think, that message that we just heard in all of our special guests who are joining us today, I think it just shows you that people are here to support you, right? People are here to support this endeavor of how it is incumbent upon us to really make sure we're teaching proper STEM education, accessing higher order thinking, innovation, and creativity, and it starts at the elementary level. Those are the kids that the wonder is the greatest. I think I said to you last time, favorite word in the whole wide world is that word why. And kids always want to know why. They're naturally curious. And like I said, we have to tap into that if we want to see the change that we've talked about in here. And the fact that all of our friends from different, from private industry and government and higher ed are joining us, I think is really drilling home that point of how important this is. So a quick poll question. Did Kane practice STEM? Did he practice science, technology, engineering, and math from that video? What do you think? Did Kane practice STEM?
So again, thinking even back, if you were here last time, what Kane did, constructing his arcade that ended up going viral and sort of changing the world.
Do you want to hit it over there, Francis? I don't want to hit the wrong button here. Okay. 98 yes, and 2% we can't tell. We'll come back to that. All right, so let's think about practices. Let's get into this a little bit now and think about what science, technology, engineering, and math practices look like. Of the list up there, which of the following is a STEM practice, where you practice science, technology, engineering, and math? Building, playing, imagining, or interpreting? A little bit harder than what day is today. All right, we have one holdout. There we are. Good job. Good job. All right, let's see what our answers are. You want to hit it there, Francis? Oh. There we go. So 57, a little over half for building, 10% playing, 24 imagining, and 10% interpreting. All right, so we'll come back to this as well.
All right, so now my turn. Before we come back to this, we're going to do a partner activity. So what we need you to do is to reach into your bag and grab the little blue cards. And you need to find a partner who you don't know.
So yes, you
so
may
you
have
guys
to
are going to have to move around a little bit. Yeah, I know. So find a partner you don't know as quick as you can, someone across from you, next to you, behind you. And what we'd like you to do is take those cards, there's 8 cards, and make 2 piles. One pile that is elementary STEM practices, and one pile that isn't. Okay? And your pile does not need to agree with your neighbor's pile, with your partner's pile. Okay? So we're going to give you about 2 minutes to do this, 3 minutes. So kind of go through, take a look at the practices that are on the cards.
So find a partner and have at it.
All right, so we want to do a group share. So if you could just wrap up your thoughts. You've got your piles. How did you choose which cards were not practices? Anybody want to share? What was the sort of thought process you were going through to say, is this something that belongs elementary STEM or not? Yes?
I took the ones that
Okay.
And also be analyzing and interpreting data, what data also isolated.
Okay, so things that seemed like isolated skills, so you said the computation, using computation and mathematics, and what was the other one? Analyzing and interpreting data. Anybody else? Yes?
I thought of the scientific method.
You thought of the scientific method and how?
And how it ties into these tasks.
Okay. So what you're saying is that
Creating a hypothesis and asking questions and collecting data and analyzing results and that sort of thing. That's kind of how I categorize them.
okay, so you categorize them looking at the scientific method and thinking about hypotheses, questions, research, gathering data, forming conclusions. Did you have 2 piles or did you have 1 pile?
I had 2 piles.
Okay, so what cards did you put in the pile that were not elementary practices?
Well, for some weird reason, my brain broke them down into 4 and 4, but I'm not sure that would be my final.
Okay.
I thought asking questions and defining problems, science and engineering, I put that in.
So asking questions, defining problems as being a practice that's elementary STEM practice.
And using mathematical and computational thinking, I put that one in there.
Okay, so you disagree actually with some other folks in the room. You put the computation and mathematical analysis in, okay. Any ones that weren't?
We kind of agreed that obtaining, evaluating, and communicating information may be something that would be a sidebar.
Okay.
To STEM.
Okay, so obtaining, evaluating information might be a sidebar. Anyone else want to share? I saw your hand. Yeah.
I think that it's more an issue of experience for children, that when they've been exposed to these things, their capacity is raised
Aha.
to be able to do all of them.
Aha. Interesting. So when students are exposed to these things, their capacity to do all of them increases. Anyone else in that same camp? See a few hands, actually a bunch all around. Okay. How many people, just out of curiosity, quick show of hands, how many people ended up with 2 piles? Okay. So yeah, so most people had 2 piles. Let's take a look. Believe it or not, all 8 of those are National Research Council STEM practices. And the kind of dialogue we're having is exactly the dialogue that's going on in the broader community. Are these isolated skills? Are they not? Are they skills that are appropriate to elementary education? Are they not? And the reality is that the National Research Council framework says that these are skills, I think to your point very clearly, that are appropriate at all levels. It may mean that they take a different form in terms of how the depth or the way it's articulated in your classroom, the way it looks. But these are all accessible, okay?
Let me just jump in on a word on that slide real quick.
Yep.
Let's go back to that slide for 1 second. Look at the wording. Remember what you know about Bloom's taxonomy? Are the majority of those lower order or higher order? Higher order. Look at the key words: evaluating, evidence, constructing, analyzing. So higher order thinking.
And actually, it's interesting to the observation about the scientific method, or I'm surprised no one said the engineering design process, because those two utilize all these skills. So what is a practice? A practice is how STEM knowledge and technology is developed. Okay? So when we're looking forward at the future of standards, and when you look at next generation science standards, specifically in the National Research Council and their recommendations, they chose the word practice very purposely. Okay? A practice is not just content, and it's not just a skill. A practice is a skill specific to a content discipline. So that's sort of like a tongue twister. So I said that to Scott, and Scott said, headache.
I said, we need a good example.
He said, yeah, give me a good example. And I said, well, Scott, how many lawyers do you know? And he said,
No, I know several. Several.
And I said, you can be a lawyer and you can know the fine details of the law inside and out, right? You can know the legal definitions. You can know everything, book knowledge, the content. You could also say that a lawyer is somebody who is very eloquent, somebody who has a lot of skill in negotiating, okay? Somebody who has skill negotiating does not necessarily make a good lawyer. Somebody who has a lot of has a lot of content knowledge in terms of the law does not necessarily make a good lawyer. But a person who can take the skill within the context of the content and apply it effectively is a good lawyer. So that's why you hear things like a legal practice. Legal practice is taking skills and content, merging the two, and applying them. And so when you think about STEM, we're talking about students understanding the content, knowing the content, but also understanding that there are skills specific to content. There are skills specific to engineering, similar but different skills specific to science. And through applying those practicing, understanding where STEM comes from, how it's developed, that's higher order thinking. That's very, very powerful, okay? So that's the thing, is that I guess we would say that practices are powerful.
They are powerful. And you think of a law practice, a medical practice. The word practice is right in there, the name of their organization, a dentistry practice, or whatever the case may be. So practice really serves as that bridge between the skill and the content and brings it all together to create an effective solution.
Right. I know my dentist is good at drilling.
Right.
There's other guys that are good at drilling too, but he also needs to understand biology, right? Not everybody who is good at drilling understands biology. It's a little scary, isn't it? The National Research Council's definition, and we discussed this last time, but I think it's something worth reiterating. National Research Council's definition for effective STEM instruction. Effective STEM instruction capitalizes on students' early interest and experiences, identifies and builds on what they know, and provides them with experiences to engage them in, look at the word, the practices of science and sustain their interest. So those 8 cards are the practices. By engaging them in those practices, we're understanding how STEM knowledge is developed, getting that ownership firsthand. Where does it come from? I can do it, but can my students do it? Okay.
Go back to stay on that slide for 1 second. The other key thing there is early interest and experience, right? Kane, all the things we're talking about, STEM squared, elementary. Build on early interest and experience. The interest is there. The seeds are there. It's up to us to tend to them. And you know what struck me too, as Francis and I were talking about this slide, is that if you're on a sports team, what do you do when there's not a game? You practice. I'm going to practice, right? They literally called practice, right? And practice is where you learn those discrete skills, you match it to the content, you put the whole gestalt together. So it's, when you really kind of get into it and you think about it, it's like, wow, this all makes sense.
And I guess we have maybe a second, even though we're a little bit behind schedule. You know, I just wanted to kind of bop back to the slide where we asked about Kane. Right? Did Kane practice STEM? Almost 100% of the folks, it looks like there's maybe one person who disagreed, said yes, he practiced STEM. So maybe take a minute, and just with that partner you were with or the person next to you, take a look at those 8 cards, okay? Just take a look at those 8 cards, those 8 practices. And while he was building, because that's the thing, we talked about building, right? The answer to this slide was 4. Interpreting. Building, playing, and imagining can be related to a practice, can be part of a practice, but unless you're interpreting, that's the only thing that's solely a practice. Okay? So just take a look and see real quick, and then maybe we'll get a share. We'll give you about a minute and a half. Did we see all of these practices? We didn't, right? Short video. If you saw the first one, you got a little closer look at what was going on with Kane's Arcade in terms of the genesis of all these cardboard boxes. But maybe we can infer a little bit from what we saw. What did we see as practices? Anything? Anyone want to throw one out? Well, let's just go through them. Asking questions and defining problems. Did we see that? Yes. Yeah. I mean, he was certainly defining problems when he was creating these cardboard box arcade games, right? Well, I'd like an arcade game. I got cardboard, I've got tape, I've got this little plastic toy. And if you go back and see Cade's Arcade 1, that was the genesis of his arcade. He won this little plastic basketball hoop. And he created a little ball out of tin foil, and off he went. So defined a problem, and we might say he developing using models. Developing using model, okay. Planning and carrying out an investigation. Possibly on some level, right? Might not have been the way we would do it in a classroom, but informally, maybe planning and carrying out an investigation. How about analyzing and interpreting data?
I don't think we actually saw that, but I think it can be assumed that he had to make decisions on where he moves things in order to make them fit within his entire prototype. However, we didn't see it.
Okay, we didn't see it, but we can probably infer that where he positioned the basketball hoop mattered. Where he cut the holes mattered. How big they were mattered.
The little army guys in the first video, I don't know if you saw the first one, but he had to move them, remember? So it's exactly to your point. In the first video, we did see him sort of analyze and interpret.
And in the first video, he also said, it was too easy. Everybody said it was too easy. So I got my green army men, and I stuck them here just like this, and now it's a 4-star hard game. Okay? Gotta love 4 stars. Must be AAA rated. Using mathematics and computational thinking. How? Aha, fun pass.
Yeah, the pin number.
Okay, we didn't see, so for the people who weren't here last time, so there was a little more explanation of the fun pass. Kane had these fun passes. They were a great deal. It was what, $1 per try,
yeah.
or $2 and you get 500?
Right.
Yeah. There's volume. What's that? That's right.
Yes.
You also had maybe 30 days or 6 months. So he had a whole business model he had set up.
There's also mathematics at a much more simplistic level, too. Estimation. I mean, I think sometimes people automatically go to a calculator and you think mathematics, and there's far more to it than just that. Spatial relations, all sorts of mathematics.
Sure, geometry certainly would be a big part of it. The other thing is he mentioned about how he needed more tickets. Maybe we could say he underestimated the number of tickets that he needed because of the increase in demand. Not necessarily something he's aware of, and that's the question, I think, as we go through these. How many of these things did he do aware of what he was doing and intentionally, or what were things that he maybe did through his own sort of organic process?
But I think he might be intentionally doing it. He couldn't name what he was.
Right.
Right.
But he has intention. He just doesn't know the vocabulary that we know.
Exactly. So he's intentionally doing it, but he's not working from a defined framework he could articulate externally like this. Okay, so if we teach the skills, then we have those metacognitive skills that we can start to consider. What do we need to do here? What's the next step? So back to your sort of methods concept.
And I'll just make that quick connection to the point you made in the back there, that I remember as a young teacher, right, I did my practicum and I got into the classroom and you start to do things. And then I remember I took that studying skillful teacher class, right? And I went to that class, and I finally got the vocabulary for all the stuff that I was doing. And some things I was like, yeah, I've been doing that all along. I know what I'm doing. And other things like, oh, they told me not to do that, and I've been doing that too, right? And so you do have to develop that vocabulary around the process of what you're trying to do.
It's interesting, and we'll just finish up these last couple, but I was invited up to the National Science Teachers Association, and we were talking about STEM practices. And somebody there, elementary teacher, said, you know, I get it. We could do this, but it's tough because, you know, in the case of the example that she used, she said, you know, we were learning about fire. And it was like a 3rd grade class. And she said, so we had the question, does fire need oxygen? Or actually, she didn't say the question. We wanted to know if fire needs oxygen. And so we had a candle, and I kind of did it, and I put a jar over it, and we saw that. But I'm not sure how we could take that and actually fit it into STEM practices. And I said, well, what kind of question were you trying to ask? And so we kind of backed into it. And so the question was, does fire need oxygen? And then we said, well, what was the model that we were developing to sort of investigate or analyze? What data could we collect? So as you start to look through these practices, actually much of what you're doing probably is close. But it's that metacognitive aspect of, are we sort of using the practices intentionally, or is it something that's more organic? And so it's not something that the students are necessarily aware of, but they may be using. So a couple other things that are in here: constructing explanations and designing solutions. Definitely designing solutions for each of these games. They're the mathematics and computational thinking. In the first one, he had a pin code on each fun pass, and it was a number that he would put into the calculator. He had tape a calculator to each of these games, and you'd put the pin in, and you'd push the check button and take the square root of it. And that would put out the verification code that told you that it was a real fun pass. Okay, again, using it but maybe not clearly understanding. Engaging in argument from evidence. Did we see any of that? I don't think so. Obtaining, evaluating, and communicating information. As he explains his games, we often see him talking about evaluating the difficulty and the different aspects of it. So again, another elementary skill. And so if you look at Kane's about 4th grade. So that's kind of giving you a sense of like, how old is Kane? Kane's like 3rd, 4th grader through these.
And just, Allison and I had a side conversation just at the tail end of this, and this is as good a time as any to bring this up. Think of the math practices. When you first saw the math practices in the Common Core, in your head, did you think like these must only apply to math? Or are they practices that apply in other parts and other subjects in what we do in life? How about these in science? Are these just science, technology, engineering? Can you use these in other areas? What's another area you could use these practices? Writing? Social studies? How about social studies? Do you think in social studies you need to ask questions and define problems and carry out investigations and analyze and look at data?
How about reading strategies? How many of you have these words on your wall as part of your reading strategies? But we think of it in the context of reading and not in the context of STEM.
Allison, anything you want to add to that? All right, so the layout of the next generation science standards in many ways reflects, obviously, the practices that we've talked about. And the next generation science standards, as we know, we talked about these last time, are being developed, and many states have adopted them fully, and Massachusetts is still working through their process in terms of next steps with our standards here in Massachusetts. But as you look at the layout of the next generation science standards, you have articulated right on there science and engineering practices. So there's that word practices again. The disciplinary core ideas and then these cross-cutting concepts is how it's laid out within the next generation science standards. Now, Massachusetts may not fully move in this direction, but this whole notion and this idea of practices is something that is definitely here to stay in terms of how we teach science, technology, engineering, and math. Is it the right one or the left one? Try left. It was the right one. There we go. So Massachusetts standards will be able to stand on their own in terms of the standards that we have. You can look at up there, develop a model to describe the movement of matter among plants, animals, decomposers, and the environment. And the math standards that are already in existence, as we know, that have been in existence for a while, have contained that sort of technology and engineering strand all the way through in the past, and that will certainly continue as we make our way through the next iteration of our standards here in Massachusetts.
a lot of times people articulate, it's like the idea of construction. Building construction, most times if you ask people, well, is that engineering? They say, yes, it's building, physically building something. But a model's different. So for instance, in the case of computer science, you could be modeling something. It's more mathematical. It's more, it's something that you're inferring from. It doesn't have to be a physical edifice or something of that nature. So it's a little bit of a play on words there. But the reason that we were saying those four, interpreting had to be a scientific STEM process. The other two, like we were saying, are sort of maybe some foundational elements, so they share some things in common. Building may share something in common with modeling, but not always. That's where we were coming from. But that's a good point.
Dimensions?
Sure. OK, so looking again, this is next generation science standards. So they're broken into 3 dimensions. First one is practices. So I'm just going to go through this so that you understand. When you look at these 3 boxes at the bottom, those are sort of foundations. Okay, so picture that like the foundation of the building with the standard on top. So the standard relies on these or uses these foundational elements as part of it. Okay. So practices is one dimension, so one of those boxes. The National Research Council, and this is their own words, the National Research Council uses the term practices instead of a term like skills to emphasize that engaging in scientific investigation requires not only skill, but also knowledge that is specific to each practice. Science and engineering have similar but different practices, so they intentionally did not call them skills. Okay, so they're different. The second dimension here, cross-cutting concepts. This is the one that it sounds like from what's been discussed publicly at the STEM Summit and elsewhere that will be removed or not part of the mass frameworks, but that's, I guess, all still being worked out. But cross-cutting concepts are a way of linking the different domains of science. They provide an organizational schema for interrelating knowledge from various scientific fields into a coherent and scientifically based view of the world. And you may say, well, that's kind of vague. What is that? So here's what it is. Things like patterns. If you've gone to anything related to systems thinking, system dynamics, those sort of things fit into cross-cutting concepts. Pattern, similarity, and diversity. Cause and effect. Scale, proportion, quantity. Systems and system models. Energy and matter. Structure and function. Stability and change. These are things, so if you are looking for an example, cause and effect. Cause and effect is part of climate change, right? Burn fossil fuels, creates carbon dioxide, a greenhouse gas creates, and so on and so forth. Cause and effect, force and motion, right? The barrel rolls down the hill. When it's full of trash, it rolls further than when it's empty. Why is that? Barrel rolls down the hill, full of trash, crashes into neighbors' barrels. Neighbors' barrels, when they're empty, move further than the neighbors' barrels when they're full. Again, cause and effect. But then you can think of systems and system models the same way. So systems of weather, right? Water cycles, climate change, rock cycles, cycles. How many cycles do we know? Okay, those sort of things, cross-cutting concepts. The concept of a cycle unites many different areas.
Is the idea that these cross-cutting concepts are evident in every area of science? Like, did they limit them to just those that are relevant from earth science to biology to chemistry to physics?
Yeah, they wanted things that were broadly applicable. So these are not things that are just sort of like, my personal nemesis has always been moon cycle and tides. I guess it's a cycle, right? But it's just like one of those things that's fairly isolated and compartmentalized. These aren't those sort of things. Structure and function is part of nearly everything. These things you can find nearly everywhere in some form within, if you were trying to make a relationship, think of a strand, what we think of as a strand now. These cross strands and concepts within strands. Third dimension, disciplinary core ideas. And you can actually see this sort of philosophy of trying to get things that are broadly applicable articulated here. So what does it take to be a disciplinary core idea? When I picture disciplinary core ideas, I picture a lot of what we talk of as strands now, content-related strands now. To be a disciplinary core idea, the National Research Council decided it has to have broad importance across multiple sciences or engineering disciplines, or be a key organizing concept of a single discipline. It has to provide a key tool for understanding or investigating more complex ideas and solving problems. It has to relate to the interests and life experiences of the students, or be connected to societal or personal concerns that require scientific or technical knowledge. That's my trouble with the moon cycles, right? It's very tough to relate to the interest and life experience of the students. You can, but it's a little different than life cycle, a little different than some other things. It has to be teachable and learnable over multiple grade levels at increasing levels of depth and sophistication. And here's where you see grouped in 4 content domains, very recognizable: physical science, life science, earth science, space, engineering, technology, and applications of science. Okay? Now, I know your brain's full, right? Too many definitions. Last time we were together, we asked, is this a picture of effective STEM instruction? We had a mixed response. So let's just ask the question again. And I know some of you all were here, so we could tell you what we got last time. Let's see what we get this time. So what do you think? Is this a picture of effective STEM instruction? And again, looking at these students, we're looking at about 5th grade. Could be even a little bit older. Give another second. Last couple folks. There's got a couple people run out to the restroom. All right, let's see what we got. B, no. 74% said no. So I'm hoping that you're saying no because you're thinking about these practices as well. When you look at this picture, are students in a position to practice, no pun intended, the practices? No. But they do have matching gloves, and I do love that.
They
There's
coordinate.
nothing like a great rainbow.
Coordinating is a higher order thinking skill, so that's true. They do coordinate.
Here's the tough part, right? And this is what we discussed last time. That definition for effective STEM instruction is right here from the National Research Council. And right next to it is the image of what we think does not embody or show students having an opportunity to practice those skills. Now, some people would say, well, maybe there's some pre-teaching going on. Okay, we'll put an asterisk there. But it's tough, right? It's tough to get a clear image. So what we want to do, and I'm going to hand this over to Scott, is we want to take a look at a couple of videos and see what you think.
So we have some videos that we found online. And the question to you will be, you want to have that practice sheet in front of you, the sheet with all the practices. It's probably in your bag as a single sheet.
It's a separate sheet, 3-hole punched in your bag.
Separate sheet in your bag. And we're going to run a series of videos. And we want to find out if you are witnessing any of these STEM practices in these videos. Okay, so these are science lessons, actual science lessons that people have posted online. And we want to find out if you think that the STEM practices are present. So let's start with the first one. It's about 1.5 minutes long.
And picture that you are the student where the camera is.
Yeah.
You are the camera in this classroom.
Now we're on lesson 3. This is verse number 4, our last verse. It's our longest verse. We're going to talk about decomposers. Decomposers take dead animals and plants and they break them down so that their nutrients become part of the soil, so other things can start to grow, other plants can start to grow, and now we have a healthy cycle, a healthy ecosystem.
So the chant goes like this. Dead animals and plants disappear in the ground from microscopic organisms breaking them down. Decomposing matter's nutrients are good for the soil. Nothing is wasted, decomposers are loyal. Fungi, bacteria, and earthworms too. Decomposers really benefit you, yeah.
So for our dance, we're going to do the cat daddy. And the cat daddy looks like this. We're going to turn to our right and punch down, then we turn to the left and punch down. Now we use choo-choo train arms as we go down for 2, 1 and 2. Then we stand straight up, 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 down for 2, up, up, down for 2. At the last part of the chant, you have 16 counts to move into your group position for your final pose. So let's do it all together with the rap. 5, 6, here we go.
Dead animals and plants disappear in the ground from microscopic organisms breaking them down. Decomposing matter's nutrients are good for the soil. Nothing is wasted, decomposers are loyal. Fungi, bacteria, and earthworms too. Decomposers really benefit you, yeah.
I like the yeah at the end. All right, so looking at your sheet, can I borrow that? Thank you. All right, did we see asking questions for science and defining problems for engineering? No. Did we develop and use models? Nah. Planning and carrying out investigations? Analyze interpreting data, using math and computational thinking? No, 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 right? You could make a thin argument that this was maybe STEAM, because there was a little arts in there of movement and dance, right? You might be able to make that thin connection. But in terms of you being the students in that class, let's go to the poll question. I mean, this is going to be like a no-brainer. This is going to be like, what day is it, right? Who owned the majority of the lesson, right? I mean, this is a quick one.
I think, also on that hierarchy that you guys did, the Bloom.
Yeah, Bloom's taxonomy.
What they're doing is the bottom one.
Correct. Correct. That's exactly right. And that point you just said, Christine, kind of keep that in your mind as we go through these, because you're going to see, like, we're going to move up the ladder here, right? I mean, this is like an example of what it doesn't look like. So who owned the lesson? Can we hit the, is it that one? I never do it right. Here we go. Yeah, the teacher owned that lesson. Absolutely, the teacher owned the lesson. The kids were not participating. They were probably slightly amused by the antics of the teacher and the rap and the singing and everything else, but for the most part, the teachers owned that lesson and the kids did not engage in any STEM practices. I didn't hear a lot of noise. I think I would have heard a lot of noise if there was a lot of...
And we can give them the benefit of the doubt. I mean, heck, if that was me, I'd have the kids doing it too. But I think the point here is that if you think about STEAM schools, right? If you have dance as part of your physical education program, if you are, you have other things going on, great. Great way to bring the vocabulary into it, right? Way to bring STEM content into physical education. But if that constitutes your STEM lesson for core instruction of science, technology, engineering, or math, yeah, you got some issues when it comes to practices, right?
All right, next one. This one's a little bit longer, and this may resonate a little bit more, but think about Bloom's taxonomy when you watch this, and think about the practices.
We just finished up a unit on natural resources, talking about what they were and which ones are renewable and non-renewable. After finishing that, we did this lab, which is the oil spill lesson. So it talks about our natural resources and how they can be affected by the oil spill. So we started with day 1 with Engage for our lesson, and I read a book called Prince William. We actually worked with our reading strategies, and we used questioning and inferring throughout that book to talk about what was happening to the baby sea otter. In the end, the students shared their connections. What do you think about that? Malik?
I would think about those animals
and it'd be devastating for me. And I know that Emily from Prince William, I think that if it was in the same neighborhood like Shelby had said, I think she'd be devastating, and this time she'd actually get kind of offended and mad.
Okay. After that, we did Explain and Explore together. We read another book called Oil Spill, talking about how people really do clean up oil spills and change it into harmless substances. But it would take huge amounts of bacteria to get rid of a big oil spill. And after that, we explored by creating our own simulated oil spills with our pie pans. And they had the water in the islands, and they had an oil spill, and they had to pick 3 tools to see which they thought would be the best to clean up the oil. And they found, doing this, that it's actually very difficult to clean up the oil. And even on the tools that were working well for them, they still couldn't get all of the oil cleaned up. So it was a good real-life experience for them. The very first thing that they had to do was dump the oil into the water, and they noticed that it didn't mix. Then they had to blow across it to simulate waves and wind. And they noticed that it would separate when you blew on it, but when you stopped blowing, it all came back together. So that was kind of one of their first aha moments.
That's weird. It like just goes back into it separates.
The next thing that was neat is when they were actually using their tools, and they were scooping out the ones they thought were going to work the best. The pipette that they had, they thought that was going to be the best one for sure. And they were getting in there and it wasn't working very well. So it was neat to see that they had made predictions and then they could find out whether or not their predictions were right. And some of them were very surprised. I had one student who did a great job. She was using the pipette and she was noticing that she was getting mostly water instead of oil, and so she thought back to the skimmer that we read about in our book, which was close to the surface because the oil floats to the surface. So she started holding her pipette just on the surface and squeezing, and then she was getting more oil instead of water out of it. So that was a neat moment too.
That's good thinking, Shelby.
Okay, so how did you guys decide you're going to compare your cups of oil? Or how will you know which one is the best?
If there's more oil than water, we'll tell him.
In order to question on mine, since it's kind of paperish, that whenever you soak it up, you wouldn't be able to get all the oil out because it's going to be stuck to it.
Very possible. We'll have to see what happens. When you guys get to part C, you need to set up your little table here.
Yes.
So I know which tool and then how much oil got sucked up with each one of them, okay? All right, now's the fun part.
This looks upside down.
Part of the experiment was just figuring out how to set up an experiment too. So how to decide what tools to use and how are you going to measure? How are you going to know which tools actually worked best and which tools maybe didn't work so well. And then in the end, they could reflect back on that and say, if I could do this over, what would I have done differently? Which tool would I have used differently? And maybe, the spoon worked well, but they also found out that the coffee filter, which in the beginning several students chose, but they didn't think it would work very well, it actually ended up working very well. It gathered up quite a bit. So knowing what they knew, what could they have done differently to go back and think about doing next time. I like this method of teaching because it really gets the kids involved. So it's not just me telling them, it's them actually getting in and learning it on their own. And when they learn it on their own, you can see it in their face. And then when they really get something, it sticks with them. So it's not something they just hear and then forget. It actually sticks with them and they remember it. Each group gets to explain what happened in theirs. And it's a good time to pull out some of the neat moments that didn't happen in every group. Because we know that when you do experiments, it's best to do them more than once, because sometimes things don't work well the first time. So if they hear what happens around the room, then they can get more experience with it.
Ours was the tights and the spoon. We tied.
So your nylon pantyhose and the spoon were both the best?
Yes, because the spoon was picked up the oil, but not very much water. And in the pantyhose, you could just stick them in, and it soaked up water and oil, but when you squeezed it out, only oil came out.
Interesting. Okay. All Our next process would be elaborate, and what we would do is actually reread the first parts of the first 2 books that I've already read. And so we'll reread that and talk about what animal rescuers do when there's an oil spill. And then the students are actually going to think of themselves as an animal rescuer. They're going to write a short story about their experience rescuing an animal, and they'll do an illustration to go along with it. And then for the evaluate, they're going to actually write letters to animal rescue workers. And in the letter, there's a rubric that goes along with it. They'll be asked to write about some of their concerns about oil spills, what they know happens to animals when they get into the oil spill. They'll need to include that. And then they can also ask what we can do from here to help them in their efforts in cleaning up the oil spills. And we'll really mail those letters too, so hopefully we can get a response back too. I think they liked this lesson because I have a very nature conscientious class. They're really interested in the environment and how they can help the environment. When I was reading the book today, there was a question asking, how can we help from here when there are oil spills? Which is a tough question because we're not near the ocean, but I had some students say recycling and picking up trash so that the oil doesn't get mixed in with the trash. I had another student who actually said that one way we could help is to drive less, which would make us use less petroleum. And if we use less petroleum, they will ship less petroleum. So they had some good ideas, just thinking kind of outside of the box on what can we do to help our environment. It's neat to see it's neat to learn from them, because every day they'll say something that catches me off guard or something that makes me say, yeah, you're right, that I don't think of myself. So every day's a new day. You never know what they're going to do. They surprise you sometimes with what they already know or what they come up with that you're not expecting. I just like to see how the kids grow and how I can affect them, not just with what they're learning from school, but also just to see them growing as people. And it's neat to see the changes that they go through.
So, better? Yeah. Okay, and Francis is going to take this one in a second, but just before he does, I think the thing to bear in mind as we watch these two, all of them really, it's a snapshot in time, right? So we really don't know what happened before, we don't know what happened after. Even the dancing teachers in the beginning, that might have led to something afterwards. So just know contextually, we know we're purposely showing you something that's just a segment in time without a lot of discussion about before or after. But
So what practices did you see? Okay, asking questions.
Developing and using models, planning.
Yes. Analyzing data, yes. You know, I was wondering if anybody would catch that.
It seems to me that the model's already been developed and for the kids, and they were using the model.
Did you catch all the worksheets or the templates that were out there? And that's why I said keep an eye on the grade level. At the beginning it said grade 5, and then at the end they said grade 4. The big question I'd have here is this the most appropriate level for these students to be accessing these skills? Could they be accessing these skills at a deeper level? Can they actually be developing and using the practices? Because remember, the thing is that it's not just using a practice, it's understanding where STEM comes from, right? That's what makes something a practice. So if you're developing the procedure, developing, like she asked the students, you know, what did you decide to collect? Well, it sounded like, you know, well, how much oil we pick up? Well, that's great, but what's the real procedure for that? I'm not sure what other...
Well, and the big problem is that in an elementary classroom with the resources you have, creating a template or creating an environment that's prepared for them makes more sense in the amount of time you have.
Right.
And what she created for them to do is much more likely something that's hard. I mean, it's a lot of work to do what she did.
Oh yeah, and she's got a lot of cleanup too.
Much different though to have to let them, if you're trying to let them develop the model, do you have the time and the resources to go where they want to go and follow their thinking?
Right.
It's hard to do that next higher thing because you don't necessarily have the resources for that.
Right.
good deep thinking.
And I think...
And do the kids have the prior experience to even know where to go if you be looking at me going, I don't know what to do next. So it's a lot based on what they've done in the past, so that
Right.
they know what steps to take next.
Absolutely, and that's a very, very valid point, and a great point in the sense of that's why we're here, right? That's the exact reason why we're having these conversations, because the more we have these conversations, the more we spread these conversations out back in our schools and say, we need to make sure that kids are coming through with those common experiences, because you're right, if there's 5 third grades and 5 fourth grades, and 3 of the third grade teachers are doing some and the other 2 aren't, when they mix the next year, right, you're going to have this variability within the class. So these are outstanding points.
And I think, actually, this is a fantastic segue, and I want to get your comments in a second, a fantastic segue to the next clip as well. Because I think what you're bringing up is a systems level way of thinking. One, I need my colleagues supporting my efforts so I understand where these kids are coming from, common experiences as best as we can have them. On the other side, the resources to actually do what you saw. I mean, sure, we'd love to see the kids doing more, but just to get that done, what we saw, is a big feat. Wanted to get your comments. I saw your hand.
Well, I would like to see the children dig into or think what materials might be better at soaking up the oil. But again, that would take a whole bunch of time, and your varied students, how many of those students even know what nylons are? They're in 4th grade, so who would think to bring nylons there? But by providing those materials, now maybe that opened up, so even though they didn't develop, they didn't go find the tools to try to soak up, now they've opened their mind a little wider. So it's a little bit of a trade-off there.
Right. And I think part of this too, it's like what we're scratching at here is that it's really, in order to do these sort of things, in order to engage in practices of STEM, we need to think a little differently about our system, kind of how students are progressing through to us, and how we're supporting each other. We have to think differently about the resources that we need to be engaging in this. But we also have to think differently about how we structure the classroom environment so that we can give the students ownership over what's going on, to develop, to consider different materials, to have trial and error in a way that creates sort of a range, right? A range without giving them the answer, without giving them the materials, creating a range of options. So those are all new things. Those are not things that are typical. Those are not things that are taught in science methods classes typically.
Well, and if you think of higher order thinking as a ladder, like physically as a ladder in your brain, we're starting to climb it a little bit in that second one. I think in the first one we may be down a couple of the first rungs, right? And we're starting to climb it in that second one. We're making our way up that ladder. And when I think back to Cain got there on his own, right? He without any sort of, he developed his own materials. There wasn't necessarily an adult there. So that proves that like the kids come with those innate things, right? They're there. It's up to us to find the time and the resources to pull that out of them because it exists and allow them to climb this ladder of higher order thinking. So we're there. We're working our way up the ladder. And I think the third video is going to be even further up the ladder.
And I think, I'm a product of the Lowell Public Schools, so I don't know if there's anyone here from Lowell. I apologize in advance now. We used to call them talented and gifted programs, right? That's what we used to call them. And I loved the talented and gifted program where I participated. Cain, I would say, would be one of those kids I was in the talented and gifted program. Kind of got through it by virtue of whatever, okay? But if we want for all children to be able to have these opportunities, we really have to kind of think differently and not just have a talented, gifted kind of thing.
I'm going to push thinking a little bit. A minute ago, when we were talking about the experiment in the 4th and 5th grade, a part of what elementary teachers know is that you have to allow children to experience materials before you expect to learn. You give a kindergartner unit students and ask them to build a pattern. If they haven't explored them, your lesson is over. So in the case of Cain, he grew up experimenting around cardboard boxes, around those materials. But if you are from is an attorney and
Right.
you don't have experience with cardboard
Right.
boxes, then you're at that same disadvantage.
Right.
So, Kane already was a little ahead of the game.
Right.
Even though we think maybe he was behind in some areas.
Right,
but-
right.
So it really is providing experiences before you expect to learn.
Right. It's funny that you bring that up, and it is, it's about, when I was a kid, the situation was we had a garage. And I got a lot of trouble in that garage, taking things apart, cementing my own swing set. No one else was going to do it. I did it. Not all students have that opportunity. And so in the classroom, to be able to engage with materials, to be able to have ownership, to be able to work with the practices, those are all things that in some communities are dying off, or for kids in general may be dying off because everything has been so engineered for them. And a friend of mine was at a party recently with some other friends. They're going off to get married. And at this party, all of the people kind of had finance backgrounds, young professionals, and they had a long drive home ahead of them. And somebody had car trouble. And only one person at the party knew how to check the oil and became known as the person who would be the desert island person. You're my desert island buddy, was the joke. It's kind of sad,
Well, and the point that you just make is why I stand in absolute awe of teachers, right? I was a 5th grade teacher myself and then a
We're all
principal.
desert island people.
What's that?
We're all desert island
Well,
people
yeah,
as teachers.
but I mean, as a teacher and then a principal and now as a central office person, and I think what gets accomplished in the limited amount of time that we have, with the limited amount of resources that we have, is remarkable. When you actually step back and look at it and say, the great promise of 6.5 hours a day, 180 days a year, and well, that's not really accurate because take out the PD days and the enrichment stuff and the half days, and it's really not even that. If you look at the actual amount of time that we have the kids, literally the actual amount of time, it's remarkable what gets accomplished. It really is. And so, we stand here and we say, we got to get it further flat, and we do. It's incumbent upon us. But we also have to honor the amazing work that has been done and is done on a daily basis. It's remarkable. It's like this machine that just keeps rolling on and rolling on. And I make the analogies to my teachers all the time in the district that it's like a speeding train, right? We pull out of the station in September, and you can't pull it over to fix it. You're hanging out the window, and you're doing all these things, and then it stops in June. And you literally kind of jerk forward because it completely stops. And then we get ready, and it cranks up again, and it goes. And it's remarkable that it happens. And I think this just kind of to underline and bold and italics the point that you're making that, kids do come in with different experiences and different backgrounds and different stories every single day. And I think that's what makes the profession so magical in what we do and why we do it. But I think it's important to recognize that fact and as we continue to try to climb this ladder of higher order thinking.
So just kind of quickly, just looking up the ladder. So lower level, remembering. Okay, finding and remembering information, list, find, name, identify, locate, describe, memorize, define. So, as you're looking at those students describing what they saw, of course, using the terms, understanding, next level, understanding, making sense out of the information, interpreting, summarizing, explaining, we saw that going on, maybe paraphrasing, discussing. Next level, applying, using information in a new but similar situation. So you looked at the book. They had the little reading group, sort of circle discussion. Taking information from the book and now applying it to this new situation. Maybe we can further that was going on. Analyzing, taking information apart and exploring relationships. Categorize, examine, compare, contrast, organize. This is where I think it starts to get fuzzy. And when you say, did they develop this? And they didn't. It's hard to understand really what the depth is that's going on here. Definitely when she was asking about, making judgments about, how much oil was collected or where to place the pipette, there was evaluating going on there. But whether it was something in a metacognitive sense was going on as part of the lesson, I think is hard to say. Using information to create something new, design, build, construct, plan, produce, devise, invent. They all seem to have those pipettes. but perhaps there was some other devices they were using. I saw also some, what do they call those, coffee filters and things. So maybe they had to shape or change that as part of what they were doing. So it could be going on there, but it gets fuzzy at the top. Just in your own back of your mind, what do you think when you were viewing that lesson? What's your gut? Usually our gut's pretty good. What's your gut? What is the highest order of thinking required to participate in that lesson that you saw? Okay. Right. And I'm not sure we really knew from the video. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Another second or two? All right, we're going to close it out here. Yeah. Analyzing. Okay. So it looks like people were sort of around that analyzing, evaluating, applying. So kind of beginning those real higher order, that highest tier. The points that you bring up in terms of, as we're thinking about practices, scalability is huge, right? To be able to share methods, to have PLCs that everybody's on the same page, resource-wise, everything else. This is another video that points out sort of a different element here. And I'm just in the interest of time, I may cut this one a little short, but we'll do the best we can here. Half the time is finding that cursor.
My name is Stephen Rutherford, and today you're seeing the next chapter in the story of our investigation of magnets. I think it was the first day of school when I did the first magnet investigation. We've investigated magnetism, including the Earth being the biggest magnet that we know of, and how, first and foremost, for me, the teacher, I need a story. Even people far out in the middle of the ocean can use their magnetic compasses to find their way. The storyline helps me with the interconnections. What's the smallest magnet that we know of, everyone? All together?
Water molecules.
Water molecules. Each water molecule like a tiny little permanent magnet. The idea that I'm putting into association things that aren't usually associated with a toy magnet. So from the huge to the unspeakably tiny, and yet they're all permanent magnets like this one that we explored with. Today was a promise. I had promised from week one when I introduced this idea of the Earth as a magnet. There was a point where I said, and would you be interested in being able to turn the magnetic force off? Because, I can show you. So Albert, today's class is an engineering class where we're going to actually engineer a magnet that can be turned on and off. I always give a title. Anytime we're doing science, there's going to be a title. That's part of the narrative.
Let's write what he's writing.
And I have them box it out. Menelik, did you write this word down and box it out? Or I have them highlight it. And they love finally having a use for their highlighter pens. But I'm also teaching science journaling. We've taken on journaling as the key element of the science program that we want to assess. So we teach it, we model it, we give examples of good journaling, we'll photocopy without names, really nice examples of student journaling, so that over the course of the year, they can get better and better. In the science journaling, the key is to keep a record of what you're doing so that we can go back to that record and have ongoing conversations. Let's get a data chart going. I'm also really conscious of generating numbers. It's what scientists do, it's what engineers do. So I say, okay, we're going to come up with some observations, maybe some measurements, maybe some numbers. So let's get smart about this and plan ahead and make a little chart to put our information in. So I'm training my students little by little to be able to make data charts on their own. All right, I have 8 tables set up. How many people feel you're ready to get going? Everything that was done today basically came out of the FOSS kit. The only difference is I have it in this narrative. I have it connected to my story.
Wait, no, this one connects to this and the big wire. 1, 2.
Start from the beginning, do just 5 reps. Yeah, you want to make sure that they're not stuck together this way. So now the other alligator clip goes here.
3.
So it's a simple controlled experiment. Step 1 was an electric power source, which is just a couple of batteries. Then connect to the on-off switch and clip from that to the long wire. That long wire is going to be wrapped around the iron bolt. A set number of wrappings, go by 5s. It's quite age appropriate for 4th and 5th graders.
Come on, turn on the switch. Turn on the switch. All right.
So by every 5th wrapping, you count the number of paper clips.
It's 11. And it went up again. And look. Every time you wrap it 5 more, it adds one more number.
Stronger.
So now you're going up to 20? It's still metal touching metal, so I think we have a good contact. I think that was causing the magnet not to work very well. Yay! Okay, you're all set.
16, 17, 18. I do it. 19, 20. Okay.
But there came a point, and it doesn't happen a lot. I mean, it happens every so often, but it happened today. There came that point when I was no longer needed. That the students were completely engaged.
There was 3 to the 2nd power.
They didn't even have any sense that I was in the room. The talk between students was focused, it was on topic. There was excitement and glee as they were making stronger and stronger electromagnets.
If you do like 5 reps, only 1 or 2 are gonna come on. If you did a lot reps, then a lot would come.
At that point, I actually can sit down and take a sigh. It's a sigh of really deep satisfaction. Learning that wasn't being directed by me.
I discovered that as many reps you get is the higher.
That is one of my fundamental interests as a teacher.
No, yeah, that's right, because if you go like this.
I love teaching when the learning seems genuine to the students. So that children become more and more persistent in working through a challenge, working through a problem. And it was great today. My best advice after 34 years of teaching is teach from your heart. When you do that, you are being your most effective.
One of the things we had talked about, I think in the earlier session, is that as you move up that ladder of higher order thinking, other things tend to take care of themselves. We talked about managing a classroom. That tends to become a little bit easier as you make your way up because kids are engaged and involved, and you see some of those discipline things, interactions between kids, they start to mitigate a little bit as you move up that higher order level of thinking because kids are so engaged. We talked about that in that first session. How many of you have been totally lost in something that you don't even realize the time has gone by? And I think that's the moment that he's talking about there. And when you think of the progression as a teacher, I remember my first year as a teacher, I controlled everything, right? It was just, you had to control everything because it was your classroom and you had all that control. And as you think of that progression of a teacher, you almost see that metamorphosis of teacher in full control, teacher less, students a little bit more, nice balance, more kid than teacher perhaps. And you kind of see that whole trajectory take place as teachers grow in their profession. And I think this gentleman gave a great example of it.
And I think he gets to the point that you all were talking about kind of in this corner here. What do you think about, I mean, there's basically the same age level students. The first group, not the first group, but the teacher in blue.
The oil spill group.
And this group here. What are your impressions in terms of the value, if you were to distill the essence, the takeaway for the students, the involvement with the practices? What's your impression?
I think one thing that kind of struck me is he was very focused on deep understanding of a core concept of knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that was going to spark more questioning. So as I increased the coil wraps, the strength increased. Very fundamental concept. And then you could lead to why and how come, and when I wrapped it. But in hers, I think there were so many things, materials, methods, length of time. There were so many factors that are also part of it, but something could get lost in that when you have a lot of things. For me, there was a very pureness to his lesson and very focused.
Yeah, and I would agree with you. I'd agree with both of you. I think, how is it that, practices, when we think about the practices, it's the skills and the content sort of combining, right? When you think about it, and I want to ask this question, who owned the lesson? Who owned the majority of this lesson? And think of it from a practices standpoint. Who owned the practices here? And I think that you see those two differences. Like, when you think of the person who had a lot going on, I think we could argue that we saw all the practices in some form. I think we could argue with this one we saw all the practices in some form. How is the ownership different? How about Kelly first?
I think them having their own writing, tying into a journal, them making their own data chart, and I would assume that he'd go in afterwards and have them analyze why.
Mm-hmm.
I think that shows ownership, instead of just filling in a paper.
Right, exactly. It's not a worksheet. It's not copy me. It was a different undertaking, wasn't it? And I agree, the ELA, maybe we didn't say reading, maybe a focus of the first. And the final piece was the writing. And we didn't get to see that final piece with the writing here, although they were journaling. The focus, though, is really important, right? In terms of the metacognitive aspect, like the actual ordering of practices, remember, practices are specific to content. And that's why they break it out as problem for science, problem for engineering, question for science. If those practices, and somebody said they ordered them here when they got the practices for their piles, they ordered them into the scientific method, right? If you take a look at the two side by side, who had students that were functioning from a metacognitive standpoint with the practices in a particular method? The students were adding 5 wraps. And they're adding 5 wraps, and they're adding 5 wraps. We saw them doing that in the same class period. So they were able to collect that data and then form a conclusion, hopefully based on a hypothesis, from that. So you can still do the larger unit, right? Maybe with the reading intro, maybe it's about magnetism this time, the discussion. And I would go both ways. Who owned the majority of the lesson? I agree, students, but certainly at the beginning, he was doing a lot of it, wasn't he?
I don't think it was that much different as far as developing and using the model in either one. He gave them all of what they needed. He told them the structure of the experiment.
He had little kits on trays.
He walked around and
right.
made sure everyone was doing it right.
Right.
He told them do it in groups of 5. He he told them put it in the data chart.
Right.
It was very much structured and developed by the teacher.
Right.
And then they used it, and then they became engaged and then could interpret the data that they collected.
So if I was looking at this in terms of gradual release of responsibility, I would put this kind of at the beginning phases of that, right? The kids didn't develop the procedure on their own. He put together all these little kits. He actually, if you count the times he says I in that first half, many, many, many times. Sorry, back.
Well, that's why I actually found the oil spill one more engaging, because she gave them a variety of things to choose from, and they had to figure out which was more effective.
Mhm.
In the magnetic one, he told them how many reps, this one said, he actually set up everything. He actually had them create their own worksheet in their notebook.
Mhm.
And told them how many reps and what to keep track of. So I actually found the oil spill more student engaged.
Mhm.
Because they had to kind of figure out which was more effective, not exactly what tools to use.
Mhm.
Did she direct all the questioning? I think the second one, since I teach that lesson and that, I know all the lessons he must have taught beforehand. They have to know about circuits,
Switches.
insulators, and conductors. They need to know about magnetism, the parameters of magnetism, and that you can create magnetism with an electric field. So it's like, I know there are a lot of things that led up to that, and that was sort of the culmination that they applied all of those skills
Mhm.
and all of that knowledge and all the troubleshooting that 9-year-olds have to do when their circuit doesn't work.
Mhm.
And then they get to apply all that learned that, wait a minute, do I have metal on metal? Is this touching the tray instead of this? So there's a lot there. So I think there was a lot of let go at the end, because they have to do that problem solving on their own,
Mhm.
even though both lessons, I think, were very much guided discoveries.
Mhm.
And the electricity one, the magnetism one, is really more a lab. You know the outcome. They're not really researching something that we don't know what's going to happen, because we're teaching them some basic scientific knowledge. So I think if you have to go and apply it in a new world-related way.
And I think, actually Scott and I talked about this. Can you believe this was the best example we could find? On YouTube, on the internet. That's the best the internet can give us.
Well, and
I completely agree.
we talked about the last session, math is the language of science, technology, engineering, right? Math is the toolbox that you bring with you to science, technology, engineering. And you saw that in his video, that he made sure that happened. He was deliberate about it.
And I think, to kind of wrap up on this is exactly that. The students in that classroom they were having what it means to be a scientist or an engineer modeled for them. They were becoming part of that process, and then they were actually taking ownership of it. And two key things stood out to me. One is when he sat down, right? They understood the process, they understood their role, they understood what it was to be a scientist or an engineer in that class, and they were onto it. The other side of it, and that's where we all want to get to, right? And without the modeling, how do you get there? The other thing he said was the narrative. And I think we understand with essential questions and everything else, the narrative is so important. And how he was saying how he was trying to build a larger narrative. And then that also gives context, because again, thinking back to practices, you have to understand the larger context, because they're not just one size fits all.
This conversation is exactly the kind of conversation that needs to take place. Like this, think about, this is why we're here. This is why we're having these conversations, because we know that in a lot of our elementary levels, we don't see as much science, technology, engineering, right? And I think there's lots of reasons why we don't see it, but one of the reasons is we need to come to some sort of a general understanding of what it looks like and what it feels like and how it's taught and so on and so forth. So these differences of opinion are invaluable. This is exactly what these meetings are about, is starting to have these conversations at a small level, so hopefully you can bring these conversations back to your school and generate that discussion of what science, technology, engineering, and STEM practices should look like in our school.
And so, unfortunately, we're running a little behind on time, and so I want to wrap this up. Just 2 slides we want to take a quick look at. Why practices? The NRC's rationale, engaging in the practices of science helps students in the following ways. Understand how scientific knowledge develops, understand the work of engineers as well as the link between engineering and science, right? They're not in isolation, they work together. To see knowledge as more meaningful and embedded more deeply into their worldview. Recognize that the work of scientists and engineers is a creative endeavor. Not something that you follow, but something that's actually creative, that you're a part of making. Science and engineering can contribute to meeting many of the major challenges that confront society today. Certainly the second person with the oil spill hit that on the head, didn't she? Their conclusion, and this I thought was very strong language, so I wanted to pull it out and just make sure to pull it to your attention. Any education that focuses predominantly on the detailed products of scientific facts, and they kind of are lumping engineering in there too, misrepresents science and marginalizes the importance of engineering, okay? From the Mass STEM Summit last week, was it even a week ago? I don't know. As you go out today, thinking about practices, because we're thinking about college and career readiness ultimately, right? What we do today matters down the road. You're turning the wrench in first grade, and second grade, and third grade, but you know what? Those turns are important because when it comes to a career, when it comes to college, that airplane has to fly and has to be ready. So practices are really key as part of this. So some of the verbiage that was shared, students who, and being thought about, students who are college and career ready in science and technology engineering will demonstrate the academic knowledge, skills, and practices necessary to enter into and succeed in entry-level credit-bearing science, engineering, or technical courses, certificate or workplace training programs requiring an equivalent level of science, or a comparable entry-level science or technical course at the institution. College and career-ready students in science and technology will be academically prepared to analyze scientific phenomena and solve technical problems in real-world context using relevant science and engineering practices and disciplinary core ideas. Use appropriate scientific and technical reasoning to support, critique, and communicate scientific and technical claims and decisions. So that's that ELA connection, right? Evidence-based writing. Appropriately apply relevant mathematics and scientific and technical context. So and I guess this is all, in process and things people are talking about and thinking about. As you go to these companies today, you are going to get to see this in action. You're going to get to see that plane at the end with all the little wrench turns everybody's put into it. And that sheet of practices, I encourage you to stick that in your pocket, pull it out, and as people are telling you what they're doing, ask them, hey, where do you use this? Where do you use that? Because you're going to see it. You're going to see it at a much higher level. But some of you are going to get to go into clean rooms and actually walk around and see these machines being built. You're going to see the product of engineering, robotic arms moving wafers through, getting all these ions implanted into them. Others of you are going to see artificial hearts and all kinds of interesting pumps, CT scanners being built, luggage scanners. People, can you believe that you can actually look inside luggage and based on the reflection of the radiation, how it fluoresces the substances inside, actually know what the material is made of? So you're going to get to see all these sort of things in action. But don't forget, it's the practices that make these folks ready to be able to engage in that career and then build these very creative, innovative technologies as a result.